Hello there. This recording is to provide my responses to the 7 one-way interview questions that I've been asked to complete for the Senior Financial Analyst role at ATB Financial. The first question is to tell me about a time you noticed a trend or an anomaly in the data that everyone else had overlooked. What made you dig deeper, and what did you eventually find? One example that stands out was when I was auditing a company that was new and was developing a new kind of technology. As background, this was a company that wasn't generating revenue yet and was experiencing delays in their project. So there was an increased focus on their cash position and impairment risk. To get comfortable with management's work, I reviewed their 1 year cash flow forecast and impairment model. What I noticed was that while most of the assumptions they used seemed reasonable, I did notice that their projected price that were used as an input in their model felt optimistic compared to what I had seen in the market. That stood out to me because the valuation model was highly sensitive to that assumption. That led me to dig deeper, where I pulled similar data from multiple independent analyst forecasts and compared them directly to management's assumptions. And when I plotted them side by side, it became clearer that management's projections were consistently above the analyst forecasts. I brought this forward and walked management through the comparison, which led to a very constructive discussion, and ultimately they agreed to revise their pricing assumptions to be more aligned with what I had found. As a result, they recognized an impairment that otherwise may have been missed if I didn't look into the data. Overall, what made me dig deeper was understanding which assumptions drive the model. Rather than reviewing everything at the same level, I focused on the inputs that had the biggest impact. The second question is to imagine it's your second week here. You finished your assigned tasks, but the team is underwater. Without asking your leader for a to-do list, how do you decide where to spend your next 4 hours? If I find myself in that situation, my first step would be to quickly assess where the team's pressure points are. I'd review what everyone is currently working on, which could be through shared trackers, recent communications or chats, or deliverables that had been outlined, to identify any bottlenecks or time-sensitive items. From there, I'd prioritize work that either unblocks others or is high priority. Things like data preparation, reconciliations, or pieces of analysis that other team members are waiting on. I would also do a check-in with the team, more so to validate my understanding rather than to ask for directions. For example, confirming whether a specific task is a bottleneck or if deadlines have shifted. Then I'd focus my time on high impact, actionable items where I can add value quickly, especially tasks that free up others to focus on more complex or time sensitive deliverables. Overall, my goal would be to have a proactive mindset and make informed decisions on where I can have the most immediate impact while still staying aligned with the team's priorities. The third question is to describe a situation where you had to deliver a financial forecast or bad news to a leader who strongly disagreed with your numbers. How did you handle the conflict while maintaining the relationship? One situation that stands out was during a goodwill impairment analysis, where I was assessing management's projected expenses. I built an independent expectation using an look back analysis, incorporating post COVID historical data and applying a standard deviation to establish a reasonable range for management's projection. When I shared my results, my senior manager strongly disagreed with my approach, where he felt I had gone too far back in the data and that it wasn't representative. Rather than immediately defending my work over email, I set up a quick call so we could chat it through together. On that call, I first made sure I fully understood his perspective and logic. Then I walked him through my reasoning and why I thought the post COVID data provided a stable baseline and how that fed into the variability assumption. What helped in that situation was keeping the conversation focused on the objective and being very open minded. Arriving at the most reasonable and supportable forecast was the goal. It was not a matter of who was right and who was wrong. As we talked through, we realized that the disconnect wasn't actually in the data itself, but it was in how I had framed and documented the rationale. I updated the supporting explanation in our workbook to better reflect the business context and key assumptions, and once that was clarified, he was very comfortable with the approach. This experience highlighted for me when delivering numbers, key and especially key numbers, especially those that may be challenged easily, it's not about just having the right analysis, but also about clearly communicating the why behind it and being very open to feedback. The fourth question was to think of a recurring report or process you inherited in a past role. What is one thing you fundamentally changed about it, and why wasn't the old way good enough? A good example of this was quarterly analytics that I used to do for a large public client, where we had calculated and explained key financial ratios and variances to assess the company's performance over time. The existing process was highly manual. Each quarter, the team would repeatedly input the same data into different parts of an Excel model to recalculate ratios and variances. Not only was this time consuming, but it also increased the risk of errors and meant that more senior team members had to stay closely involved just to ensure that the report was accurate. After going through the process, I realized that we were spending more time preparing the data than analyzing it, which is where the real value add was. To address this, I redesigned the model by including a centralized key inputs tab. All calculations were then being driven off that single source, which eliminated repetitive data entry and made the process much more streamlined and reliable. As a result, we significantly reduced preparation time, improved consistency, and enabled more junior team members to take ownership of the process. This freed up senior team members to focus on higher value adds and client insights. Overall, the old way wasn't good enough because it was inefficient, error prone, and didn't scale very well. My process was to make it more efficient and more focused on delivering insights than just producing numbers. The fifth question is to tell us about a time you realized you made a significant error in a model or report after it had been sent to leadership. Walk us through the next 60 minutes of your life. One situation that I think stands out to me was during an audit where I prepared a data set that an offshore team was using in their work. After the data had already been reviewed and sent out, I later noticed that some of the results coming back from the team didn't align at all with my expectations. That's when I realized I had missed a mapping issue in the underlying data. In the first few minutes, I validated the issue by looking at the underlying data set to make sure it was real and understood the scope. Once I confirmed it, I immediately escalated it to my senior manager and partner, taking full ownership and clearly explaining both the issue and the potential impact. Within that first hour, my focus was on clarity. I quickly built a reconciliation between what I had sent to the team and what they were working off of to make sure the differences were known and whether they were material. At the same time, I outlined a plan to resolve it, including realigning the data and coordinating with the offshore team. Once we confirmed there was an impact, I organized a call between both myself and the offshore team to walk through the issue and the next steps. This led to the team performing specific additional procedures to address those gaps. Afterward, I reflected on what caused that error and implemented a more structured review checklist for myself, specifically around data mapping and completeness, so similar issues wouldn't happen again. That experience reinforced for me the importance of quick ownership, clear communication, and having strong controls in place when working with data that others are relying on. The sixth question is, if we asked you to build a model to predict loan growth, but the historical data was messy, incomplete, and inconsistent, what would you use to fill in the gaps? If I were working with messy, incomplete, and inconsistent data, my first step would be to assess the quality and reliability of the data set before jumping into modeling. I'd want to understand where the gaps are coming from, whether they're random, systematic, or tied to a specific time period or business change. From there, I'd clean and standardize the gaps, aligning formats, removing duplicates, and ensuring consistency across fields so that I'm at least working with a reliable baseline. To address missing data, I'd take a thoughtful approach. For smaller gaps, I might try to interpolate the data or use a trend to fill in the gaps. If larger portions are missing, I try to supplement it with external data sources if the data may be widely available. For example, if the data was on risk-free rates, I might use something like the Bank of Canada to fill in those gaps. I'd also perform a sanity check on the data by identifying outliers and validating whether they reflect real business events or whether they're actually potential indicators. Where assumptions are made, I document them clearly and, if possible, run sensitivity analysis to understand how those assumptions impact the model's output. Ultimately, my goal wouldn't be just to fill in the gaps, but to build a model that is transparent and one that I could defend and still be useful for decision making despite having imperfect data. The seventh and final question is, what interests you about this job? And how does this fit into your current career goals? I'm really interested in this role because it feels like a great next step from my experience as a senior auditor. In my current role, I've built a strong foundation in financial reporting and analysis, and over time, I found that what I enjoy most is working with data to uncover insights and really understand what's driving the business. What draws me to this position is the opportunity to be closer to the decision making process. In audit, you're often looking back and validating what's already happened, but I'm really interested in shifting towards a more forward looking role where I can help influence what happens next. One of my long term career goals is to provide input and analysis that guides strategic decisions, so this role aligns really well with that. I also think my experience working with large, complex clients has helped me develop a strong ability to analyze data critically, spot trends, and communicate insights clearly. I've had to explain complex financial information to different stakeholders, and I'm excited to bring those skills into a more strategic, business focused environment where I can add value beyond just reporting. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my response. Bye bye.